it is dry this year. California and much of the western states are entering another drought with below-level snowfall and rainfall, extremely low reservoirs, and declining groundwater levels. Every time California enters a drought, the reaction is the same. Save water, use less water, recycle water, cut back. Good advice. But it seems as if each time we enter a drought, we have to relearn all of this.
Statistically, if you look at it, you'll see that California has more flood and drought years per average year than any other state in the country. And so we're always working with extremes, both seasonally within each year and across years.
In my 35 years at San Joaquin County Office of Emergency Services, we experienced probably the longest period of rainfall and flooding in historic times, roughly from 1900 to 2012.
While droughts have occurred during the last few hundred years, they are nowhere near as long or as frequent as during the times before Europeans arrived in the state.
But it is very clear from the paleological record that California has, or parts of California in particular, have seen very long droughts for 100 or even 200 years.
Based on a 1,200-year tree ring study commissioned by the California Department of Water Resources, long droughts were much more common in the past, with 4 periods prior to the 1400s that qualify as megadroughts, lasting for decades. The California Department of Water Resources has this to say about the tree ring study. The results from the 2017 tree ring study confirmed what DWR believed and has stated in the past. California's climate alternates between wet and dry conditions. Findings from the study, which predates recorded data, helped DWR understand the duration between these periods and precipitation records in that region for future risk assessments. This information, paired with the understanding that climate change means we will see more frequent and severe droughts in California, has prompted the development of long-term efforts and planning to make the state more drought resilient.
How do droughts affect the Delta and people who live here? After all, we have plenty of water flowing through from the mountains and rivers through the Delta and out into the ocean.
That is the issue. The water moves through the Delta, and in years of low rainfall, significantly less flows from the Sierra Nevada to the Pacific Ocean. With decreased water flows, salt water from downstream moves upstream, which in turn affects the delicate balance of the ecosystem of the Delta. The saltwater delineation point is constantly moving. The farthest documented point inland was in the 1930s, when it reached all the way to Stockton.
Before we developed the Delta, the city of Antioch was able to get fresh water from the western side of the Delta most of the time. In recent times with the projects, they try to keep the point of greatest salinity just downstream of West Fultz River by Bethel Island.
Marin County is coming to Yolo County, and by that I mean, many of the plant and animal species we see on the coast, it won't be long before we start seeing them in Yolo County, just because there's a little bit more salt and they're building up in the soil. From an ecological perspective, I think it's pretty well understood that we're likely to see a shift from more freshwater species to more brackish and saline species.
There are several man-made attempts to try to slow down or halt this intrusion, such as the emergency drought barrier at Fultz River.
This barrier holds back salt water from invading the Delta. The salt can have a devastating effect on agriculture, as well as water meant for urban use.
There are also 2 Delta cross-channel gates. When open, it diverts flows into the interior of the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta and the McCollum River.
There does need to be a certain amount of export from the major rivers to counter the influence of the marine waters that are trying to intrude into the delta. For all of the ag users within the delta, they don't want to be extracting water that has a significant amount of salt in it. That's poor for the crops. In my view, and in many of my colleagues' view in the ecological field, actually the management to eliminate salts from the system has probably impacted to some extent the ecology of the delta. I think many of the plants and animal species that we find there are adapted to variability in salinity.
80% of water use in California is used in agriculture. Salinity in the delta affects farmers in the delta and statewide.
Crops that prefer salty soils are far and few between. I do know that we're starting to see more pistachios grown here now. So maybe that's something that we'll see more of. And what happens when, or if the tunnels ever get built? What's going to happen to agriculture in the Delta as we know it? It's probably going to change dramatically. And a lot of that water that's up in the Sacramento River is going to be diverted. So to me, we have to start looking at making some major changes for things like, say for instance, the grass that's outside of the building here. Why are we watering grass? We can't eat grass. We can't drink grass.
One thing I learned from the last drought is that waste is always water used by somebody else. And that, I just think, illustrates that we have less water here in the state than we would like. And there's only so much water, and in some years there's hardly any. So that we're going to have conflicts about water because we have droughts all the time, and we always will.
The idea that farmers are using up all the water to ship things overseas is something that people really don't understand. You know, they have to do that to make a living in a lot of cases, but also there's a lot of consumption that happens right here in our own country. And we feed a lot of people in this state, and especially in this valley. And without us, you know, where is your food going to come from? You know, and take a look at what you do for your own water use. Like I said, if you've got a lawn, right? What do you got a lawn for? How many gallons does it take to make a blade of grass that you're going to mow?
It's under the whole row, all the way from the other end of the field. And this is the way we irrigate the fields through buried drip. Very efficient.
With the high cost of water, the high cost of labor, I can't grow some crops anymore that I used to. I used to grow wheat as a rotation crop. I can't afford to do that anymore. I used to grow other crops, maybe garbanzo beans or something. We can't afford that anymore. The only thing that we can afford to grow is higher valued crops like organic melons, almonds. There's no way that our costs can't go up. Our water has gone up, our labor is going up every year. We have to be able to have a way to pass that on. We can't absorb that.
Drought means a lot of things to a lot of different people. As far as your rangeland owners and your cattle owners, drought is a lack of precipitation that doesn't allow the grass to grow. As far as the cities go, it's a lack of water available to them, be it from the reservoirs or from local runoff. So every year in California we have a drought compared to other places. California is a Mediterranean climate. That means there is 6 months out of the year where we don't get any rain, and that's normal for us. But in Ohio, where they get rain every week, 6 months of no rain is a drought for them.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, oversees the National Weather Service, which keeps a close eye on weather patterns both locally as well as nationally.
Your local weather service predicts rainfall out with very good confidence in amounts and timing, 5 days. We can stretch it to 7, but that's about as far as the models and our skill goes. Much better than it was 20 years ago. Drought is a slow-moving, long-term event. We are not used to monitoring things like that. We respond to the instant, the rising creek, the heavy rainfall. So drought's a little harder to monitor. How do you monitor with no gauges? Because you're looking for impacts.
This topic interests me personally because I worked for San Joaquin County Office of Emergency Services from 1982 through 2017. This was an exceptionally wet period in California history where heavy rainfall and snowfalls stopped droughts. Behind me, you can see the San Joaquin River today.
And here it is in 2017, one of the wettest years in California recorded history. The snowpack was so dense that year it took through August for it to melt. Based on information from the Public Policy Institute of California, the statewide applied use of water in 2006 was approximately 100 million acre-feet in a wet year. In a drought year, that number drops to about 60 million. This water is the lifeblood for fish, native animals, and ecosystems.
Drought can impact some communities much harder than others, as is the case of Mendocino on the north coast, where the reservoir went dry. And a number of Central Valley communities were overdrafting their groundwater, causing wells to dry up and more subsidence.
Look at water in California. Maybe 10% of all the runoff in California is used in cities. Half of that urban water use is for landscape irrigation. So to keep more than 95% of the population going and more than 95% of the economy going, you don't need a lot of water. Agriculture in the whole state uses about 80% of human water use, and 40 to 50% of all the runoff. In a drought year, we have very little water available for fish. And in wet years, we count everything that humans don't use as environmental water, and so it gets quite large.
In good water years, there is sufficient water for human use and to keep the environment healthy. In years such as this, 2021, everybody suffers.
One compelling issue we've had in research and interviewing for this story is, does the state of California have a comprehensive drought plan as Governor Brown ordered during the last drought? That plan had solutions and best practices on how to handle this and future droughts, short or long.
There is not an overall drought plan for state agencies to follow. Drought response and drought impacts are local and highly site and sector specific. For example, the State Water Project and Central Valley Project have a contingency plan for drought operations. The more than 400 water suppliers who are required to prepare urban water management plans are required to have water shortage contingency plans. There is a drought task force under the governor's office, which has not responded to questions from us. This task force is made up of representatives from various state departments. At this point, there is no way of knowing what, if any, plans they have formulated to help communities and counties prepare for longer and more severe droughts.
Semi-permanent reduction in our water consumption individually is probably something we're all going to have to begin to live with, and I think the sooner we confront that reality, the easier it will be on the state to help us plan for that.
1 unit of water equals 1 unit of crop equals 1 unit of food, and we're getting the most we can out of that 1 unit of water. So if we're going to have less water, we are going to have less food.
Every water system manager should be preparing contingencies for all kinds of problems. And if you run out of contingencies that you're prepared for, preparations, and you get to that kind of position, it's almost entirely out of mismanagement.
During the 2012 to 17 drought, while I was at the San Joaquin County Office of Emergency Services, the governor did order a comprehensive state drought emergency plan, which I drew off to develop my own county plan.
Leadership from the state is essential in coordinating efforts between the 58 counties in the state. But more than that, a state drought plan should look to the future in determining how water is best used to serve the citizens of the state overall, as well as looking at other countries with perennial drought. These measures should include mandating permanent water savings both in agricultural and urban consumption, moving open waterways such as canals underground to prevent evaporation, desalination plants, or even restricting growing crops that are heavy water users.
For Soundings Magazine, Michael Cockrell reporting.